Anybody sweaty from worship? No.
You didn't go hard enough.
Yeah, you didn't go hard enough. That's. Hey guys, so we're in the middle of a series called Praise Hands. And so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everybody to turn this way. I know we used to have chairs, now we don't. It's okay, but turn this way. And we want to do something a little bit different tonight. So last week, the man, the myth, the legend, E.J. Cooper, brought us the word and talked about worship on the first week of this series. And so as we were talking through how we want to continue to go about worship and talk about it with you guys and things, I love having conversations with people. I love when you can sit down and just ask questions and see where their brain goes, see where their heart goes. And so that's what we decided to do. So tonight, we're going to do just a Q&A. So last week, you guys got paper in your small group time where you guys got to ask questions. Some of you asked some absolutely incredible questions. Some of you asked terrible questions. Blake Hegman.
Oh, amen.
Yeah, he's not even paying attention. But some of you guys asked some great questions, so we wanted to dive in and talk about these and really just let these guys, because they both are incredible worship leaders, do such a great job of allowing us to have a moment and kind of helping us get in that right mindset and just an incredible time of worship. But first, really quick, we know who you are. Like, you're old news. You're like yesterday's lunch. Okay, but
Kanye was old news, but then he came out with Jesus.
I would like to allow you to introduce our other guest for the evening. Oh. Both guests.
Okay. Do you guys remember last week when I was talking about my beautiful wife, Lauren? This is not her. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. This is my beautiful wife, Lauren. This is our child. He looks just like me.
Lauren, tell us just about you really quick. Like, where are you from? Favorite color? What's your favorite thing to eat right now?
Okay. Well, my name's Lauren. I was born and raised here, in Vista, California. I work at North Coast Church at the Vista campus. I'm a preschool teacher. My favorite color is orange and Kraft mac and cheese.
Ooh.
All the time.
What's the other one? It's like the bunny. It's like
Annie's?
Annie's. Yuck.
I was like,
yuck. So
I don't go near that stuff.
I don't know if it's the lack of butter or if it's the shape. I don't know.
I think it's everything.
No, because Kraft makes good
SpongeBob.
And like they did Pokemon.
Yeah. You guys like SpongeBob mac and cheese? Anybody? Annie's are okay. Well, I do like their white mac and cheese, like the shell. That one's pretty good. I
haven't tried
but
that
hey,
one.
so
the
right
deluxe?
now, yeah. So here's what we're gonna do. Over the next 15 minutes or so, we've got. Here's what I'm gonna ask for you guys. I'm gonna ask a favor. Tonight is a little bit different. We've got two incredible guest speakers who you're gonna hear so much from them. But here's what I'm gonna ask. I just want us to tune in for just a minute because you guys asked some incredible questions around how to worship, what worship is, what do we do, why do we do, all these different things. And I don't want you guys to miss the answers to some of these and what our two incredible worship leaders have to say and their thoughts and where they've been in their walk with Jesus and how they've led. So I don't want you guys to miss this. So tonight, I'm going to ask, even more so than when I speak, because you guys are so used to me. We're friends. But let's just give them some respect and just listen because I'm so excited, even for me. Like, I'm ready to take some notes for some incredible questions and some incredible answers. You guys ready for this? Yeah. All right, cool. So we're also going to have our questions up on the screen, so in case you guys miss me reading it. But here's the first one. Very straightforward. You kind of talked about it last week a little bit, but why do we worship?
Why do we worship?
Why do we worship?
Are we speaking strictly like corporate music worship?
Let's go music worship, yeah.
All right. I had a verse last week in Ephesians that it's a command in the New Testament that we sing to Him, that we worship. And if you think about it, God created us, yes? We all agree that for the most part. Does anyone like Legos? Or used to like Legos? So imagine this. Stay with me. Imagine if you create your own Lego city. And then you get to appoint what each little Lego person gets to do. You get to say, oh, you're the builder, you're the you're the barista, you're the superhero, whatever you want to be. But then you go like this and you snap, and all of a sudden the Legos come to life, right? If the superhero wants to go off and be a barista and make coffee, you're like, no, that's not what you were made to do. You were made to be a Lego superhero. And then the worker man wants to go be the president, and you're like, no, we already have a president. I picked him. It's not a democracy. I picked him. But if we think about it, we're kind of like God's Legos. God created us, and he created us with a purpose. And he created us to worship him. All of this, if you made your own Lego city, it was so that you could have some fun, right? God created earth and everything that we know to exist for himself. It's not selfish because he's a good father and he loves us and he extends his arm to us, but we worship because that's what we're made to do. I think that's my answer.
Love it. Yeah, I think exactly what you're talking about. As God created this world, as he created each and every one of us in a specific way, I think the one common theme is we're made to worship. Like, last week we talked about worship is what you give worth to. And if we know and we believe in our heart that God created us, Jesus came and died for us, that's what we should give worth to, because that's better than anything we've got here. It's better than this coffee. It's better than...
I don't know.
Yeah, coffee's pretty good, but it's better than anything else, and so that's what we should give worth and value to. So that's awesome. Okay, here's another one. Ready?
I'm not ready.
I love this question because we don't always think about it. Because kind of like when I asked the first question, we think of musical worship, right? But here's one: how many ways can you worship?
I like this one. I think there's a lot of different ways. Like a lot of times when we think of worship, we think of like immediately worship through song and dancing and movements and lifting your hands, but I think that's just a small part of worship, because like God called us to worship and he made us to worship, but there's so many different things that we can worship in so many different ways. As far as like obedience is worship to God because he calls us to do something. So worshiping him and obeying him kind of go hand in hand, I think, but
yeah, that's great. I totally agree. I think like it says in Romans that we're to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, and that's our true and proper worship. And that doesn't say anything about singing. That doesn't say anything about raising our hands, about dancing or anything. It says we're offering our bodies as a living sacrifice. That that our lives, we know that on our own we have however many years we have on this earth, and then it's up to God after that where we go. But you get to choose your actions in his love. You get to choose what you want to do. So in giving worth, like we talked about last week, like the way that if I'm not in the right headspace, sometimes I worship my phone. I worship Instagram. I'm on there and I'm just scrolling and stuff, and all of a sudden an hour's went by, and I've given everything that I am in that whole hour just to Instagram, which does nothing for me. But I mean, if we give our lives, if we offer our lives as a living sacrifice, then at the end of our lives, that God is, if we're storing up our treasures in heaven, we get the treasures that we stored up in heaven. Yeah.
There's also other way. There's if you've been in church for a while, there's tithe and offering. So it's giving something that God has already given to us. It's giving a piece of it back. Worship can also be, again, when Lauren talks about obedience, it's we talk all the time, like going and talking to that kid at school because God has put it on your heart. By us saying, I'm going to do that, that's worship. It's giving value and giving your time, your energy, whatever. It's being obedient to what God's called you to do. It's so many things. It can be really anything you want, but it's however you're going to give worth. But those are some great examples of how we can do that. So how can I worship at home or in my everyday life?
That's a really good question. I think, like, a long time, especially as one, like my dad's a worship leader, and I grew up in the church and going to church all the time, and when we will go into the time of music, it's worship time, and I think that like sometimes like, well, I don't sing well. I can't play an instrument. So when I go home, when I'm at school, like how am I supposed to worship? And it's kind of like what Lauren was talking about in that obedience. When we're doing what God has called us to do, that is worship. When we're obeying His commands, that's worship. And I know that it seems so. It's something that's such a simple thing sometimes of obedience, of do what God says, and that's worship, and you're giving worth to Him. And sometimes you feel like you're in a box, but it's really, it's a freedom, because you don't need anything from this world at that point. If you're living in what God has called you to, so like TJ was saying, if God's calling you to go sit with that kid who's alone at lunch, like that's worship. That's obedience. That's when you guys start working and collecting a paycheck, or maybe if you guys have an allowance, like God calls us in the Bible to tithe, to give 10% of what we're making to Him, and that keeps our heart in the right place. Like that's such a tangible thing to be able to be like, okay, God, like you're in control with what I have. You're in control of my possessions, my money. So I trust you, and I know you have power, so I'm going to give you this, like you call me to. And man, there's just so many ways to worship. Like kind of we talked about in that last question, but I think spending time in prayer in the Bible, like alone time with God, is just so valuable. I think that's a form of worship. And one of the most weird kind of things is I'd say meditation. That's one that's, especially in our day and age, of one that's like, you think of meditation and you think of the bald monks that are, but there's things that are like sitting and just sitting in His presence and acknowledging that God's there, being still and listening. And if He has something to say to you, like maybe He's going to bring your mind that way. Or I've never heard his voice audibly, but I know there's people who have. Like God said to me in this moment that I'm supposed to go here, I'm supposed to do this or do that, and that's amazing. But don't always look for that, because that's not how God speaks to everyone. But I think one thing that like helps us, when I am in a good, consistent routine of reading my Bible every day, praying with God, meditating, just acknowledging, taking a half hour or an hour just acknowledging His presence and reading in His Word so I understand it more, so I know how to live better. Like when I'm going throughout my day, like I'm reminded more of God's presence. And so when I see that kid alone at lunch, I'm like, oh, like this is what God's calling me to do. You know, if you're in a circle of friends and someone's making fun of someone else and you're like, no, that's not cool. That's not what God calls us to do. Guys, that's not cool. And I know that's like scary sometimes, but I think that acknowledging of his presence. Yeah.
I think too, like some of the best times of worship that I have with God is sometimes just like in my car when I'm like bawling my eyes out because life is like crazy and I'm just so overwhelmed. And like worship doesn't have to be every Tuesday night with the lights and the music, and although that's awesome and EJ does a great job at that, but like that shouldn't be your only like worship time. Like sometimes when I'm washing the dishes, I listen to worship music, or even just like that, and like listening to what God is calling you to, and just having an open ear and just being willing, I think is a huge way of worshiping every day too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, here we go. What will worship do to grow with my relationship with God? So how does worship and growing with God, how do those go together?
Yeah, I mean, even going back to what I was just talking about of spending time with God, if you think about relationships in general, relationships take time, effort, time and effort. Like, if I'm going to be TJ's friend, I'm going to spend time with TJ. I'm going to put effort into learning about him, learning what he likes, learning what he doesn't like. I'm going to go hang out, hit baseballs with him. Well, not right now. Rest in peace, my ACL. But I'm gonna invest in him. I'm gonna learn about him. What is he going through right now? What's good in his life right now? Those are things like, if I'm spending time and I'm putting effort into our relationship, then we're gonna get closer, right? So if we're spending time with God and we're learning more about God and we're opening ourselves up more to God, that's what's gonna grow your relationship with God. If for example, in this time of worship that we do when we sing to God all together, like, what if you weren't talking to your neighbor? What if you weren't making jokes? Like, what if you were actually worshiping God and telling him, God, you have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever you reign. Like, those are powerful statements. There's places in the world that if you said those 4 lines, you would get killed. Like, those are incredibly powerful words. And to acknowledge God's presence and to worship him and put him in his rightful place as number one in your life, like that, putting in that time and that effort really, I think, could grow your relationship with God.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you know if you are worshiping something? Anything. I know last week, EJ, you talked about it's what you give worth to, so you could worship all these different things, but how do we, when we look at our lives, how do we establish and say, this is something I've been worshiping, whether we want to or not, but how do we know if we're worshiping something?
Yeah, that's good. We were actually just talking about that, and I'm going to steal what EJ said. He said it's whatever determines your actions or whatever dictates your actions. So kind of like the first thing, like what's the first thing you do in the morning? Like, is the first thing that you do, like, thank God for the breath in your lungs, or is the first thing you do, like, scroll on your phone? Like, I do that all the time where I'm just like, oh, my phone's right here. Let me, like, look. When I haven't even thought about, like, oh, it's a huge gift that I'm able to, like, breathe right now and be awake and have a baby. Like, just, like, the craziest things. And so I think that's really cool because what we give value to, like, we kind of idolize and put above God. And I think we don't realize that because we just, like, that's just, like, the first thing we think of. And kind of, like, like, what are you putting your value into? Are you worrying more about what your friends think of you or what God thinks of you? Like, are you worrying more about, like, what your parents are going to think of your grades or, like, how you're glorifying God at school through your friendships and things like that? And I think oftentimes, like, we all do it where we, like, totally worship other things unintentionally, sometimes intentionally. But yeah, I think that's kind of it, like the first thing you think of over God.
Yeah, and we talked about a little bit, like, what's dictating your actions? Like, why do you do, like, the things that you do? Is it to impress people? Is it to get better at a sport? Is it to do better in school? Like, and I love that you talked about, like, the first thing that comes to your mind. Like, what are you excited about, and what do you? It's okay to be excited about things, like, that aren't God. But we talked about taking good things and making them God things, right, last week? And it's when you realize that everything that I'm doing is going toward my social status, like, or impressing my friends, or how well I'm doing in school, or impressing my parents, or impressing whoever that is, or getting better at a sport, or whatever it is that you do. Like, when you're putting those things and everything that you're doing with your free time is going toward that, like, that's when you have to stop and realize, oh, like, this is what I value. Like, this is my number one right now, and that's, if I call myself a Christian, that's not okay. It is okay in the sense where God forgives you and that you still have time to give him your worship. But I think it's when you realize that you're starting to prioritize things over God.
Yeah, I think another one that hit me too that I think about this constantly is like when you look back at yesterday, like what could you not live without yesterday? And for me, oftentimes it's my phone or it's for sports, football season, right? Or these different things. But when I look at my day, did I give time to God? Like, did I live without God yesterday as far as my time, reading my devotional, whatever? And so for me, that's number two. Is like those are the things that you said something. What do you worship? Before God. It's those things. It's what came in the way of me having any time in my day for God, and that's to me always been an easy indicator of what am I worshiping. It's what could I not live without yesterday? What was taking up all of my time? What was every piece of my energy? And did I give any time to God? Because if not, that means all those things are being worshipped ahead of Him.
Yeah, that's really good.
Let's see, what's the next one? Oh, here we go. We're gonna skip one because I like this one. How do we know worship is the right thing to do? How do we know? We show up on Tuesday, we sing, we dance, we get wild. Sometimes we punch each other. That could kind of be worship, I guess. But how do we know, like in our core, in being a Christian, a Christ follower, how do we know that worship is the right thing to do?
I think sometimes we don't. And I think, like, especially when I'm in a more of a dry season, when I'm not spending time with God, when he's not the first thing on my mind, like, worship can seem so secondary if we're just talking about the corporate worship that we do here on Tuesdays or sometimes on weekends and stuff. Like, it comes down to a trust thing where God says, I'm God, and the other things that you like aren't. And we sometimes in humility got to be like, I really don't feel like worshiping right now, but I know, God, that you are worthy of my worship, and I trust you that by me investing in you, me storing up my treasures in heaven like we talked about last week, like that, I know I'm going to be better for it. And it's difficult because it doesn't always seem like the most fun. I mean, some of the best moments of my life have been times of worship, and like undoubtedly. But there's also times where there's been times where I've been leading worship on a weekend sometimes where I find myself like I'm completely thinking about something else right now. I know the words, I know the chords, like I'm playing, but I'm thinking about like how good my first dunk in high school felt like something completely random.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I used to see no.
Don't laugh.
He played in the 8-foot rim.
I dunked on a 5-foot
League.
rim once.
But really, like, there's, like, sometimes we know that worship's the right thing to do because of everything God has shown us, but we don't know it, if that makes sense. Like, we know it in our head, like, we know that's right, but sometimes we just don't feel like this is what's most important. Yeah. And I think, like, with time and with practice and investment in our relationship with God, like, we realize how impactful and how important worship is.
Yeah. I think, too, that some of the best times of worship, too, and that's kind of what God wants, is, like, worship is so vulnerable sometimes, and it can be like, man, I really don't want to worship right now, and I don't feel like lifting my hands, and, like, right now I just, like, don't feel like, why am I worshiping right now? And that's kind of, like, that's worship in itself, is, like, giving God your, like, doubts and your thoughts. Like, worship doesn't just have to be like, okay, I'm going to raise my hands. Like, it can be, and that's still, like, worshiping out of obedience. But, I mean, that's some of the best times that God, like, wants to hear your doubts. He wants to fill that with truth. He wants to know, like, where your heart is. And so I think that's really cool, because sometimes I'm like, man, like, I've had a long work day. I'm tired, and I've been through rehearsal. I just don't want to worship right now. But that's kind of some of the best times when I'm like, okay, God, like, this is like I'm worshiping because I know that you called me to do it. And sometimes those are the best times where I'm just like, oh my God, like God just like rocks me in worship. But yeah.
Yeah. One thing I thought about as you're talking is I think when things become a routine, sometimes we're talking about, you know it, but you don't know it. I think when things become a routine, like on Tuesday at Elevate, about 7:25, 7:30, EJ's going to go up with the band. They're going to play some songs. Then we're going to go to message. And we just kind of know that. But I think, like when you look at a relationship, okay, when you know your family's going on vacation, like you have time to get ready for it, and it happens. It's fun. It's great. But how many of you ever had like a surprise trip come up and you like poop your pants? Gigi's like, been there, okay? Right? Like there's such a difference when things come up from your heart. Like when you're like, now's when I'm going to worship. And as Lauren talked about, sometimes it's in the car. Sometimes it's in the shower. Like who knows? But I think when we know it's time to worship is what, I think we miss something, right? I think it becomes a routine. And again, even when we look at our friendships, like I don't want Chandler to text me because his phone popped up and said, okay, it's time to text TJ. Like that's not a friend. That's just, it's routine. But when we show, and we're thinking about them, when we had that relationship where we go, right now I want to worship. I want to talk to God. I want to have that moment. Or I want to text my friend right now to see how they're doing. Or hey, surprise, we're going here. Like those things all, I think, build our relationship because it's when our heart is in it and goes, I'm in right now. Like I feel it, as opposed to like, I know I'm supposed to. Yeah. So I know for me, that's one when I'm driving in the car, when I wake up, or when I get to work and I go sit in my office and before I do anything, I'll just hit worship music. And that's just time for me to just sit with God. But it's not, okay, when I get here, this is what I'm going to do. But it comes because my heart is like, this is what I want to do right now. Yeah. So I think that's part of it too, is not I know it, but I know it and I feel it and it's time. Yeah. So I'm gonna skip around a little bit, but why do people raise their hands during worship?
This is a really good one. I, for a long time, did not understand that. There was times like before I understood it where I did it because it felt good and it felt right in the moment. But I think there's a couple reasons where you can lift your hands. One is like victory. Like I'm so excited that like God has saved me. I'm so excited that like I get to be on the winning team and like it's just like yes. You know, like you win a close sports game or whatever that is, and the first thing is yes, like that's one reason. I think another thing is like when it is surrender. Like if at war, let's say, or if you play paintball, when someone comes out behind you and they're really close and they're on the other team, I forget what they say. But at that point, you can choose to surrender, and you go like this, and you go, okay, like I'm showing you, I'm not gonna attack you. Like I'll just go out, I'm out, don't shoot me. But I think like one of the things is like, God, like I surrender. Like this is a time like I realize I've been doing things my way. I realize like I've been worshiping other things, but God, this is like I surrender to you in this moment. Like. I know that I'm not going to live up to this commitment right now, like later on, but I'm gonna do my best to do so, and I surrender to you. One other way that I see people raise their hands, if you want to consider this raising your hand, is like this, and this almost like an acceptance of a spirit, being like or like a receiving thing, of like when you go up to give someone a hug, you don't go like this, right? Hey, give me a hug. You kind of go like this, and I think like you're accepting his presence and his embrace. Yeah.
For me, the Bible references having a childlike faith. Yeah. And I always go back to like when you're little and you go to like hug your dad, your mom, like you reach up for them. And so for me, like one of the things, some of us in the room are new to church. Some of us have been at church for a long time, but you need to hear this. God is our Father. Some of us out there don't have a dad. That's me. I didn't have a dad growing up. I didn't have a dad in my life. But there was a dad, even when I didn't realize it, even when I didn't want it, there was a dad that was there, and that's God. He's supporting me. He's loving me. He's encouraging me. And so I always think if we're called to have a childlike faith where we just love and we're there, if you think about just that look, and that's always for me when I lift my hands, it's reaching out to God and saying, like I want you, like I'm here, like take me. And even in times when I'm beat up, I'm having a rough week, I just feel like surrendering, whatever. It's just, God, like take me, like just hold me, like let's connect, right? And so that's something like for some of you never maybe heard that, and some of you have, but to remind, like God is our heavenly Father. And so that's just always one that I think of as a kid. Like, you guys are about to have a baby, and you get ready because you're always going to have that kid reaching up to you because they have that connection and that love for you. And that's just kind of the same thing for us. So that I always think of in worship is we put our hands up. It's in other ways is you're reaching out for your Father to just pick you up and lift you up. So
I like that. That's good.
This one I love, and I'm excited to hear what you guys say because you're both very talented. If you aren't good at worship, are you not a good Christian? And let's go, we could go more musical worship on this one, okay. But take it whatever way you want. But if you're not good at worship, are you not a good Christian?
Yeah. As far as like good, as in like good singer, good at like the consistency of worship, or
whatever, which you go for it. Take it, girl.
Yeah. I have to think about that.
Let's go
one.
good singer.
I mean, yeah, I think that like worship isn't a skill. Like I think that like the assumption in that question is like some people are good at worship and some people are not. But I don't like we talked about like you're worshiping something. Like even right now, like some of you aren't paying attention and you're giving worth to something else.
Like what'd he say?
But like you're giving worth to something. Like you are worshiping something, and it's not a like no one's better at like standing than someone else or like breathing.
You're
It's
probably
just
pretty
something
good
you-
with that robot leg.
Yeah, I know, right? Like no one has like breathing competition because everybody just does it. It's like, but I think what defines you as a good Christian is what you're worshiping, not if you're good at it or not.
Yeah. I think that term good too, like is there such thing as like a good Christian? Because like there can be so many different like ways of that and translations, and like technically according to the Bible, like we're not like good. Like God is good. We are broken, and in his brokenness we are renewed and things like that. But I think like there's not really like a good Christian, but I mean I get what that means. But I think like I don't know, I just think it's so cool because like you don't have to be good at instruments. Like I really don't play an instrument. I just sing and lead worship through singing, and I think it's really cool because it's not just about that. Like I saw this thing that said leading worship is more than just singing songs and playing instruments. It's cultivating an environment for others to encounter God, which is like so cool as a worship leader.
Yeah.
Just like creating that environment, even if you mess up and forget the words. Like sometimes when I'm worshiping and I forget the words, I just laugh and I'm like, you know what, it happened. Like it's not about me. And like I think that's the coolest thing is like you don't have to be a good Christian because it's not about you. It's about who you're worshiping.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the best Instagrams out there right now is called Worship Fails.
I love
You guys
that.
should look this up on Instagram because if you think
One word, worship
you have
fails.
to be perfect at playing guitar or drums, you should look this up because you'll see some of the best worship bands out there as far as talent goes fail all the time, and it's incredible.
All the
but
time.
you know, my mom, I told you guys about her. Her name's Vonda. She's the best.
Wanda, what-
yeah, I think it was supposed to be Rhonda, but they wrote it down wrong and they went with it. I don't know.
Rhonda?
You ever met a Vonda? I have.
It would be more likely that it
mom.
was Wanda.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. You know, maybe you're right. Maybe
Yeah.
you're right. But my mom always said this. She said, you know, because in the Bible, in Psalms, it says that we're called to make a joyful noise. Okay? It doesn't say you're supposed to sing super good. It doesn't say that you're supposed to play the guitar really well or hit the drums on time, right? Because when you guys see me drum, it's usually not good. But it says make a joyful noise, okay? And trust me, one day you guys are going to meet Vonda, and I'm going to have her sing for you, and your ears are going to bleed. This is going online, so I probably shouldn't have said that. But
Vonda is calling you out.
But my mom will tell you she's a bad singer. It's not good. She's if you've ever been like an adult service, especially, and there's like that like opera singer behind you, and you're like, yeah, and their names are usually like Ethel, right? They got too much like perfume on and everything. Like that lady, okay? That's my mom, and it's rough. It's so rough. But here's what I know, and here's what I've always known: she is worshiping God. And she's doing it in an incredible way. Some might call it a perfect way because that is her ability. It's her gifts. She's giving it her all. And trust me, she's giving it her all. Okay? Volume, all of it. But that's just one of my favorite things is that it doesn't say, hey, make sure you're a good singer. And I know sometimes we look at the band and, man, these guys are so talented up here. It's incredible. But we worship out here too. Just because we're not leading from right here doesn't mean we can't lead worship either. Because we lead by the people around us. You know, when we're singing and dancing and getting crazy, each one of you is leading the people around you in the attitude of worship, in the act of worship, and all those things. But it doesn't have to be you singing really well. It doesn't have to be you playing guitar. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord is what Psalm says. And it just means give it everything you've got and give God everything. That's all it means. But right now, I want you guys to just thank EJ and Lauren for their, I mean, such a great job. Like, I don't think we realize, like, how special it is to have these guys here, each of us every single week. But they gave their time to us tonight to just answer some questions that are kind of difficult. But right now, I'm going to bring the band back up. And just for a second, I want you to stay with me, stay with me, stay with me. Stay with me really quick. Shh. As we just talked about what worship is last week and tonight, as we just went and we were diving into what God calls us to do, the life that we're supposed to live, the act of worship and what it looks like and what it is, here's what I want you guys to do right now.
Yeah, no, that's not my mic.
Some of you are not paying attention. That's okay. Some of you don't want to be here. And if that's you, you're more than welcome to, for these last two songs, to step in the hallway. No one's going to stop you. You're more than welcome to do that. Because here's what I'm going to ask. Don't distract those around you. You see, we talk about what worship is, and that it's building a relationship, that it's giving a piece of you, that it's giving your all, that maybe it's lifting your hands, maybe it's just in the midst of the words going, you're not paying attention, you're just talking to God. You see, worship is, like EJ said, what you give worth to. Worship is what you give your time, your energy, your effort to. Some of you worship your social media status. Some of you worship your sports. Some of you worship so many things. But the one thing that matters, the one thing that above everything else will change your life is giving your time, your energy, your effort, giving worth to God. It'll change your life. Now, some of you are like, worship still sucks. Worship's still super awkward. The guy next to me, like, he smells weird. Like, and maybe all of that's true. Maybe the person next to you can't sing. Maybe the band on these last two songs messes up. Maybe the air conditioning kicks off. Maybe you spill your drink. Maybe you're tired. Maybe your dad just left. Maybe your world is crashing down. But in the midst of all of that, the one thing that remains through it all is God. The one person who will be there to love you, to care for you, to make sure that you make it to the other side is God. In our relationships, none of us want a one-way street. But sometimes that's what we do to God. You see, everything that you have, everything that you are, came from God. And all God wants is for you to lift your hands and say, I'm here for you. God just wants you to lift your hands and say, God, I'm with you. God just wants you to take a moment, and maybe you don't feel comfortable singing, and that's okay. Maybe you don't want to raise your hands. Maybe it's too distracting to have your friends around you. Close your eyes. Step away from them. Don't miss this opportunity tonight as we sing 2 more songs to dive in and grow that relationship. To say, God, I'm ready to do this. God, show up in my world. But if you begin to give worth to God in worship, your life changes. You see, so many of us, myself included, we worship things that are hollow. We worship things that have no substance, that don't feed us, that don't build us, that take away from us, that rip our hearts out. But if only you knew, if only you truly understood that by giving your worth to God, it will fill you up. If you gave your worth and your time and your energy to God, you would never be the same. God will enter your heart. God wants to just take over everything and give you everything. But it takes you beginning to worship your God in music, with obedience, with loving those around you. That's worship. And so tonight, like I said, what I want you to do, each and every one of you, is remove every distraction. Maybe it's your phone that right now you need to turn it off. Maybe right now you need to walk away from your friends because all they're going to do is throw something at you. Maybe all they're going to do is bug you. Maybe all they're going to do is continue to talk and not focus. And if that's the people around you, just for a moment, step away from them. Close your eyes if you need to. We're going to sing a song that we've sang a lot. It's called Good Grace. And I want you to really look at these words as you sing them out to God. I want you to understand what it means and begin tonight to give worth to God. Because I'll tell you from personal experience, in the midst of my darkest days, in the midst of my most difficult time, I go back and I look and I say, I wasn't worshiping God. I wasn't putting Him at the center of my life. And that's why things got crazy. That's why things got out of hand. But tonight, begin to worship God. Put Him first and watch how your life changes. I'm not saying that the people that walked out on you will come back. I'm not saying that everything gets fixed perfectly tomorrow because God's got a plan. But what I know is that by worshiping God, it's you saying, whatever the plan is for my life, I'm in it. And God has so much more planned for you than you realize. God has an eternity with you. So begin tonight to worship God. Remove all distractions, and let's sing out these 2 songs.